when I look back on the Kingsman movies, I have very different opinions on both. I think the first one is awesome, and I think the second one is trash. So now we get to The King's Man, which is a prequel to the entire thing, featuring absolutely none of the characters from the first two movies. And let's talk about this one. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Before we get started, click on that red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you know whenever I post a new piece of content. So The King's Man is a prequel to Kingsman and Kingsman the Golden Circle. I really like Kingsman because it did something unique and different at the time. It wasn't afraid to take a lot of chances. It had one particular scene in a Kentucky church that was very like insane and brave for the time, and the whole movie was just a lot of fun and completely crazy. The sequel tried to do that and just amp everything up even further and just completely fell flat. I really do not like that movie. I went back and watched it yesterday to kind of like get a refresher and remember that movie, because I remember at the timing like, I'm not super impressed by this. And oh, good God, that movie is not aged well. It is terrible. It goes way too heavy on the gadgets. It's like frenetic and insane. The entire thing is basically like in slow motion, and it just tries way too hard and manages to be extremely boring while trying to not be boring. So movie sucks and I don't like it, even though the first was incredible. So I love this one. Critics seem to ravage it like a lot, and yet I adore it. I didn't see it in theaters, watched it for the first time on digital, and I think it's fantastic. Is it flawless? No, it's got a couple little problems. But overall, I think this movie is great. I think it's highly enjoyable. It does a lot of things right. So what I like, the story and the characters. Instead of this like massive world domination plot where the supervillain is trying to take over the entire planet, this movie is more like historical setting based, right? It's about the Kingsman trying to, like, the Kingsman being established, and this character, the Duke of Oxford, trying to basically like get the United States into World War One and end of the whole thing. 1917 is the only other like major motion picture that I can remember that really like hit home on World War One, and this movie does tackle a setting that we just don't see enough. The Great War is just ripe for great stories. It's not as cinematic, like it's just not as like easy to digest as World War II, because the good guys and the bad guys are a lot more nebulous than in World War II, the Axis versus the Allies. So I like this setting. I dig it. It's great. Ray Fiennes plays the Duke of Oxford, Orlando, and he's really good in this. He's great in everything, and he gives just a really good like performance of this story about father and son, and establishing this secret government agency, and all that stuff just works. He's great in it. Tom Hollander is one of those actors that is like good in everything he does, and he's not really in enough stuff. You'd probably recognize him as Cutler Beckett in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And he's like the head of the East India Trading Company in those films. You'd probably remember him. He was in I think Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, and he's just really good. He plays like multiple roles. He plays Tsar Nicholas of Russia. He plays the King of England, and he plays like the head of Germany. Like, he plays all these different parts, and it's really kind of goofy and fun. And he's great. I just wish Tom Hollander was in more stuff, and he's really good here. One of the things that works well about this movie too is that it's very low tech. Part of the problem with The Golden Circle is that movie was just all like gadgets and gizmos and robot arms and robot dogs, and it was just too much. There was too much going on in that movie from a tech standpoint, and by dumbing all that down and making this just like a gritty kind of mixture of spy and war movie, it does something different, and it just works because it allows you to focus more on the characters instead of the action. Obviously, this is an action movie, but when you put your characters first, the action stuff settles itself out, and that's the case here. Um, the focus on the heroes is really this movie's strength too. It the problem with that I had with the first Kingsman to a certain extent and the Golden Circle to like a huge extent is that they focused a lot on the villains. And I liked Valentine in the first movie, and I think that Julianne Moore's character in the sequel was just trying way too hard to ham it up. And the problem is it just wasn't a real it wasn't a real well written character, and I didn't care about her. So this movie chooses to focus on the heroes instead, and by establishing this secret government agency and the people that are a part of that, those relationships, the movie does wonders by focusing on that instead. The father and son relationship, that's the centerpiece of this movie, goes places, some really dark places that I wasn't expecting, and it's really good. It's just really good. The story of like son who wants to enlist against his father's wishes has been done before. I mean, I did a Hacksaw Ridge a couple weeks ago, and that's a huge part of that movie as well. That's a tale as old as time, and this movie does enough things differently with that story that to set itself apart that I really enjoyed that aspect of it. This movie also cuts out a lot of the cinematic parts of the last movie, and that also is successful. This doesn't have like a ton of slow-mo, and when it is used, it's used in the correct manner to get the point and emotional beats across. It doesn't just hammer you over the head with it the entire runtime of the film, which is what the Golden Circle really did to an extremely ridiculous degree. And it takes its time. That's something that the last movie didn't do well. That's something that the first Kingsman did really, really well, is it took its time establishing its characters and its setting and putting the pieces all together instead of just throwing everything at the screen and hoping certain things stick. So the movie's ability to take its time and draw things out is one of its strengths. There are some unpredictable moves and good twists here that I wasn't really expecting. This movie wasn't as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. There's one particular twist in the back half of the film that really, really worked well for me, and there's really two major twists in the film. One is like a plot decision that they make that could have gone really sour, but in the overall story works well. And then one is like a villain reveal that's, I'm kind of hit or miss on. It's kind of easy when you go back and watch the movie to see, oh yeah, this sort of makes sense. But the overall way it's revealed, I think is kind of cool. They basically don't show you the character, like who he is. They don't show you his face until the very end. And they do some cool stuff with like accents and his origin and his nationality that I think works really well. And there's a couple things I didn't like. There's a couple things that keep this movie from being a true classic. Rasputin is a major character, Grigory Rasputin, the famous Russian mystic, the monk, and he sucks. He's weird in this movie, and it doesn't really work. I know what Matthew Vaughn is trying to do with this character, and instead of being like this intense, intimidating, scary guy, he just comes off as like a huge creep and a weirdo. And the intimidation factor basically is just completely gone. And there's one particular scene in the movie that completely jumps the shark. And I was just like, oh, I hate this character. I can't wait for him to die. And that's not like a good way to do your villain. Not a fan of Rasputin in this. He's a major character and a major villain. And the way he's handled, I think is just it's a lot cringeworthy. The one other thing I kind of mentioned already, the villain reveal at the end, a little bit on the cheesy side. And really, those are the only two things that I can ding about this movie. I really did love everything else. And I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this movie from top to bottom, from front to back. So The King's Man is now streaming on digital. You can check it out. And it is not as good as the first movie. I don't think it's as good as Kingsman. That movie is damn near flawless. And it is 1,000 times better than the sequel. Don't let anyone tell you different. Thanks so much for checking out the review. If you liked it, if you found it helpful, consider subscribing. You can also like and share the video. That tells the powers that be that it is worth watching, and it pumps it up in the algorithm. So Hit me up in the comments. Let me know, is this movie complete garbage? Are the critics right? Am I right? Am I wrong? What do you think of this? Where would you rank it among the 3 films? Do you think this deserves a sequel, which Vaughn has talked about? I certainly do. I would love to see a movie that's set between the end of this and the beginning of Kingsman's, preferably something that still only has these characters. Hit me up. Let me know. See you next Wednesday, 9 a.m.